All right, everybody. So welcome to Watts Atelier Friday Night Live. I'm Eric Gist, and tonight I'm going to be doing a little demo on how to use powdered graphite or powdered charcoal to do a drawing. This is going to be basically a dry mixed media demonstration. I'm going to be using a little bit of graphite, a little bit of charcoal, a little bit of charcoal powder, drawing a fair amount with my erasers. So just kind of moving back and forth between all these different media to get the desired effect. It's a little bit more painterly way of working than what you might normally see. So what I'm going to do is, I already kind of laid this in earlier so you guys didn't have to watch me lay this in for about 20 minutes. So what I'm going to do is start blocking in my light and darks very quickly, and then I'll come in with some of the charcoal powder and brush in over the top and start getting into blocking in the bigger, broader tones. So just real quickly, I'm going to take my pencil, not getting too fastidious with things, just very broadly start blocking in the tones. And this is more just sort of just solidifying the drawing overall, and also so that when I come in with my charcoal powder on top of this, it doesn't just obliterate my drawing. That can be a concern with this technique, that if you lay your drawing in first before brushing in your charcoal powder or graphite powder, as you're brushing it in, it can kind of get rid of a lot of your drawing that was there. I did hit the drawing with a little bit of workable fixative, but even with that, sometimes it can kind of smudge away and lose a lot of the drawing. I'm not, overly concerned about that, because that's why we practice drawing so much, so that you can still find it. But if I'm going to take the time to get some construction in there, I might as well try to keep what of it that I can. So just using more the side of the pencil. And even though this whole side of the face is in shadow, I'm going to look for the deeper shadows right now. I'll actually get the separation of that shadow side of the face when I start blocking in with the charcoal powder.
Eric, we have a quick question. Fabio asks, what kind of paper are you working on?
This is just, it's either 300 series or 400 series smooth Bristol board. I think it's Strathmore. It's just got a very smooth tooth to it that I like a lot. It's not quite like the smooth newsprint, but it has a lot of the same characteristics. It allows for a nice smooth blocking. I mean, I'm not even really taking my time with this. I'm being fairly, I wouldn't say haphazard, but I'm not even fighting for the smooth tone. It just goes down fairly smoothly. So. I kind of prefer a smoother texture to my surfaces personally. I'll create texture through direction of my pencil strokes and use of the pencil more so than using the tooth of the paper. I like that look of using the tooth of the paper, but this is just sort of a technique that I've gravitated more towards.
Speaking of which, what kind of pencil are you using, Eric?
This is just a Faber-Castell brand drawing pencil. It's just a B hardness. It says 9,000 on it, but it's just like their standard regular drawing pencil. There's nothing special about it, other than it's a B hardness. I do the bulk of my drawing with a B or a 2B pencil. I'm not too finicky about my materials, to be honest. If I've got some kind of paper that's relatively neutral, not too glassy but not too toothy, and something that'll make a mark on it, I can usually get something decent. I have my favorite materials, of course, but you know, I really don't think that doing a good drawing should be dependent on having, you know, too much of a home field advantage. I just want something that's not going to fight me more than anything else. I don't use a lot of technique or I don't want to call it tricks because they're not really tricks, but I'm pretty straightforward with my process, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There's not really a lot of fancy use of materials or anything. You know, not too much of what I'm going to do here is going to just blow your mind. You're basically just going to get to see the way that I draw when I sit down and draw in my studio.
So there's a question from Raphael. He asks, why don't you sharpen the graphite pencil like you do with charcoal when you draw with charcoal?
If I were doing a larger scale drawing, I might. But I'm used to using those longer tapered pencils on a big, 18 by 24 drawing where the head might be 2 or 3 times the size of this. So I mean, I've got a pencil sharpener that actually sharpens that it's not a short point. So it actually kind of works on the same scale as what I'm used to. So that's the only reason. If I were doing a larger drawing, if I were doing a big 18 by 24 drawing, I probably would sharpen it to a long taper. I just don't feel like it's necessary. Plus, you'll see that as I get further in the drawing, I get up on the tip of the pencil and use a lot of hatching. That's a little bit different than using the Conte or Wolf Carbon or whatever your charcoal pencil of choice is. So yeah, that's mainly why. Scale of the drawing goes down, so the scale of the tip of the pencil goes down. You'll see that I'm still using it very much the same way. I just don't need those long pencil strokes. I can still get a pretty broad bevel to the drawing. So coming up on the end of getting enough of a block in here for me to work with. Right now, just beyond the general drawing, I'm not worried too much about, I should say, I'm not spending too much of my thought on shape design. During the lay-in, I gave it more thought. And then as I start to get everything working, I'll give it thought again. But right now, I'm just keeping things fairly simple. Just, basically filling in the values. Much of this will get simplified or washed away to a certain degree once I start blocking in with my charcoal powder. I feel like that's working pretty good right now. Now what I'll do, and I'm going to do this as best I can here. I'm not used to doing it on a vertical surface, so we'll see if I can do this without just making a mess of the studio here. I always like having a little bit of extra Bristol board down here so that I can kind of test out the strokes and not get too crazy with them as I come down here on the drawing. I really like the way the charcoal powder will really push around, and you can even, later on in the drawing you'll see, I can even use my fingers to do a fair amount of the drawing. If you don't like the value to move around quite that much, you can always use graphite powder, which sticks a little bit more to the surface. Just building up these tones by smudging the surface around. And I even like the way that it kind of pushes the drawing that I already have in there around. It ends up with this nice sort of ghosty feel to it that I can start designing back into as I move around. It's one of the things I like about oil painting, and why I've kind of gravitated towards that as my main medium when working professionally, is that I like the fact that you can kind of paint in and then smudge around and then paint in and smudge around and paint in and smudge around. It's very, very forgiving. I mean, in the end you have to make, really strong design decisions at some point, but I like that ability to kind of push things around and manipulate the media on the surface.
So we got a question pertaining to oil painting, not necessarily drawing. Natalie asks, when did you first start getting into oil painting?
I guess when I was about 25, so about, 17 years ago, give or take. I had done a little bit of oil painting before that, but that's when I really started spending a lot of my time working in it. But yeah, working in this charcoal powder reminds me a lot of working in oils. So. Alright, so that's got a pretty good feel to it right now. And maybe. Get a little bit of the background blacked in.
So Martin wants to know, once you kind of get into this drawing a little bit more, if you make a mistake, how easy is it to kind of correct that mistake with this method?
Pretty easy, because it pushes around quite a bit. The bigger fear is that smudging your hand through something that you like. For me, that's the bigger danger. Not so much not being able to correct things, but sometimes being able to hang on to things that you like is the greater fear. And just like a lot, well, the same way with oils. Sometimes you'll hit a really nice brush stroke, and you can fall into the trap of trying to hang on to that brush stroke for the rest of the painting, and it's really not a very good idea to do that. Jeff's dad, Robert, who will actually be doing a Friday Night Live here in a couple weeks, is fond of saying, and never fall in love with a hot lick. And that's good advice, especially when you're working in a more transient medium like this, where stuff moves around a lot. If you spend an inordinate amount of time trying to hang on to something you perceive as being really good and not focusing on the big picture, then it can cause you a lot of troubles. So even though you might do something that looks really cool, don't fall in love with it too much, because it can cause you a lot of problems. Anyway, so that's kind of my first pass through with the charcoal powder. Now I'm going to switch over to a fairly soft pencil. I think I'm probably going to go with a 2B for right now. I've got a little piece of paper here to help prevent that smudging that I was just talking about a minute ago. And we'll come in here and start really bringing this drawing out of the soup.
So we've got 3 hours that you're going to be spending on this drawing, a little more if you take into account the lay-in. We've got a few students asking, that in mind, what's the most time you've ever spent on a drawing like this?
Probably about that. If it's just like a single head like this, if it's a more complicated scene, like for a finished illustration or something with multiple figures, maybe day and a half. So say 10 hours, give or take, something like that.
Got another person asking, do you use masking fluid at all when you use this type of approach?
I never have, but I've seen it used with approaches like this, and I like the things that have been done with it. I've just never gotten around to really doing that. I'm not that. It's kind of contrary to my temperament. So even though I like it, I think probably the reason I've never gotten around to using it is it's just it's really kind of not me. I'm just not that fastidious and careful a person. So that's probably why I've never really used it. But I have seen it used, and some really cool things have been done with it. So yeah, it's definitely something that can be used in this technique. But no, I've never used it.
Do you ever use blending stumps?
No, not a fan of them. Occasionally, I will use just a piece of tissue, which I've got sitting over here, or maybe a Q-tip or something. But no, those shading stumps or shading tortillon, yeah, I'm not really. Again, a little too fastidious for me. I'd rather control things with with an eraser or with a pencil. I like the spontaneity of that a little bit more than that careful blending with a stump. Even when I use something to blend with, it's more just kind of to neutralize an area that I feel like I've gotten a little too busy or something like that. Not so much to manipulate edges, which is how many people use those implements. If you like them, that's awesome. But no, it's not. I don't really like the look. From a personal standpoint, I don't think it's bad or wrong. It's not a look that I gravitate towards. That really slick look. So right now, basically what I'm doing is just coming in and kind of reaffirming the drawing a little bit. And that's what I use the drafting pencils a lot for, is to come in and just sort of a control to make sure that I'm keeping things accurate and solid. I'll probably come in with a wolf carbon here in a little bit to get a little punchier and a little more painterly with the drawing.
So here's a quick question. Does the brand of graphite powder matter?
I've only ever used one, so I don't know.
And what brand is that?
It's the Generals. I've used that in both the charcoal powder and the graphite powder, and I've liked both, so I didn't really, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I also like the way that the graphite goes down once there's that layer of charcoal down on the surface. Kind of has a little bit of a toothy slide to it that my hand seems to like. And once I put down that charcoal powder, it might sound kind of funny, but I actually like the way that it, and I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, I like the way that it kind of obliterates my drawing a little bit. It keeps me from being too married to the drawing. Sometimes when you have a decent lay-in, you start being too careful, and I feel like that takes a lot of the the fun and, for lack of a better term, the magic out of drawing. It's one of the things that I think sometimes can ruin professional work, because you turn in a sketch and the client, rightfully so, expects something that, looks like that sketch, looks like a finished version of that sketch. But letting the painting get lost, or the drawing get lost and found and lost and found, I think it leads to interesting discoveries of shape and design that professional work doesn't always really allow for, or at least it's risky to do so, because you can muck things up pretty quickly. But that's part of the fun of it. It kind of keeps you focused, keeps you interested, keeps you engaged in what it is that you're doing, rather than just sort of following the routine, following the pattern, which at least for me can kind of tend to happen and get you into a little bit of a funk artistically, because you become almost about the technique and the routine and the methodology, and not so much about creativity and discovery. That's one of the great things about being a student, is that you're constantly discovering new things. Well, after about 10, 15 years, 20 years of doing it, a lot of those discoveries are harder to come by. Unless you're just constantly pushing the envelope, which again is a bit risky, a bit hard to do when working professionally, at least for me. There are certainly guys out there that constantly push the envelope in their professional work, and I admire those people immensely. It takes a lot of guts to take chances on a job.
Who would you say are some of your favorites that push that envelope?
Ashley really seems to take a lot of chances even on professional work. Phil Hale, back when he was still doing illustration work, took a lot of chances. John Foster takes a lot of chances. Rick Barry. Those are the ones that are kind of coming right to my mind. I'm sure there's a bunch more if I really had time to sit down and rifle through my memory palace. But right now it's those are the ones that are popping right to my mind.
Scott Fisher's another one of those guys for me.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Scott Fisher's huge with that. Always constantly trying new things. And I'm a huge fan of his work, so yeah, it really works for him, and I'm a huge admirer of his work and how he constantly reinvents himself too, which is impressive.
Yeah, but staying true to that same cohesive voice though,
Yeah, you always know it's him. Yeah, you always know it's him, absolutely. Yeah, so yeah, he's actually probably the best example. Tom came up with a much better one than I did, but yeah, Fisher's awesome.
So what's your favorite, drawing or painting? Or do you like either for different reasons?
I think that's a tough one. I think I probably like painting better, but I often enjoy drawing more, just purely from the standpoint that it's a bit more of a no-brainer for me because I've done so much of it. I've done, man, if I got to the hours of painting that I've done in drawing, I'm sure that I would probably enjoy painting just as much. But I love the discovery. I love the end result of painting more. But drawing is so much more intuitive to me. It's much less of a it's much less frightening. Painting is still frightening to me. I'm horrified of painting. But it's like the kind of fear that comes from riding a roller coaster. It's still a lot of fun because of that. That adrenaline rush is part of what makes it really enjoyable. That adrenaline rush is gone for me a bit with drawing, but it's just almost like second nature to me now. So yes, I like them both a lot, and for different reasons, almost completely diametrically opposed reasons, in fact. So those are that's my answer, I suppose. I hope that made sense. In my mind, it sounded a bit like gibberish, but so. Yeah, great questions. Fun questions. Yeah, really. One of the fun things about this too is that even while I'm using the pencil, it kind of pushes the charcoal around on the surface as well. So I'm almost using, someone mentioned the shading stumps earlier. When I'm using this pencil on, with the charcoal powder already down there, it kind of does both at the same time. I'm putting down additional graphite with the pencil, but at the same time, it's kind of smudging and pushing around the charcoal powder, which is something that graphite powder wouldn't really do. So that's one of the differences there. That graphite powder is a bit more controllable because it kind of stays where you put it a little bit more. But one of the nice things about the charcoal powder is that it really pushes around and blends with the additional materials, which is kind of fun. Again, kind of frightening, but kind of fun.
So here's an interesting question, a little bit of a loaded one.
Uh-oh.
Do you think it's possible to be very honest and direct with your work and still make a living? I'm assuming as an illustrator in a commercial market, is what they're asking.
Is it possible? Yes. Is it much harder? Also, yes. So yeah, it's absolutely possible. There have been numerous artists. I mean, there's always going to be degrees. It's not like one or the other. It's not like you're gonna, either you have to be, a quote unquote sellout and make a living, or you have to be completely true to yourself and not make any money. There's all sorts of in betweens. You can have someone who really is constantly pushing themselves and exploring new options and being quote unquote honest to themselves. Like a Scott Fisher or James Jean back when he was still doing commercial work. Guys like that. Or you can just really be more of a studio guy and just do the job that's assigned to you and go on about your day. But then there's tons of in between as well. So I think there's a bit of good fortune involved with remaining completely true to yourself, meaning going out there and putting your work out on the table, out for everyone to see, and then hoping that someone sees your work and the right project comes along. I used to do a lot of work that I wasn't really true to myself, and I still do a fair amount of work like that. You got to pay the bills. But then the strain came along, and it was like I couldn't have designed a better job for myself. It was the same stuff that I would have probably been painting even if I hadn't been hired to do the job. Maybe not exactly, obviously, but I paint monsters and vampires and zombies and paint them in a noirish fashion. And then I got hired to do the covers for the strain and worked on that for what, like 4 years, however long it was, a long time. And I was doing a cover a month. And so, I just put my work out there, and then someone with some sort of pull, some sort of impact, saw it and gave me that job, and I basically got to do exactly what I do for 4 years, 5 years. So it just kind of, it depends. I would say always try to be true to yourself and put what it is, represent yourself in an honest fashion, and then just realize that if you're good, people are going to hire you to do all sorts of things that aren't necessarily true to you, and then it's up to you whether you're going to take that job or not. But when you're doing portfolio pieces, put in your portfolio what you want to do. I would never recommend someone tailors their portfolio, and art directors will tell you something completely different. But to me, when you're doing portfolio samples, look out there in the job market and see what jobs are something that you would like to do, and then do pieces that are honest to yourself that fit an established market. Like one of the things I used to do when I first started putting my portfolio together for illustration is I would get the Spectrum annual, to enjoy the artwork, but as I went through, I would actually mark the pages. I had these little, adhesive page marker things, like file markers, and I would mark those pages, and then I'd go back through and I'd write down, not the artist. Usually I already knew who the artist was. I would actually write down the client and the art director. And then as I did samples, those are the art directors and clients that I sent those samples out to. I figured, well, if they're already hiring this person to do this job that seems like it would be a lot of fun for me to do, then maybe if I get good enough, they'll hire me to do that kind of job. So yes, it is possible, but you're probably going to have to do a lot of other stuff along the way. It's not, that's why it's a job. It's if you're just going to sit around painting whatever you want all the time, that's not a job. That's just a hobby. That's for fun. So if someone's going to pay you, they're usually going to pay you to do what they want you to do. The days of someone, if they ever existed, but the days of a rich patron coming along and saying, yeah, here, I'm going to support you and, pay for you to paint whatever you want.
A top hat and monocle.
Yeah, right. Yeah, someone with more money than good sense. Yeah, those days, like I said, if they ever existed, are long gone. So now, as a commercial artist, you're going to be painting something for a client who needs a specific illustration for a specific product. So yes, short answer, yes, it is possible. Long answer, I just gave you. You have to, brand yourself and tailor your portfolio to what it is that you want to do, realizing that along the way, especially lower, not, I don't want to say lower end because that sounds kind of condescending, but non A-list clients will hire you to do whatever because you're new and that you're who they can afford, and they don't really care so much that what's in your portfolio isn't exactly what they want to hire someone to do. So they're going to look for that diamond in the rough, that person that they can, that they know in 5 years they're not going to be able to afford anymore. And you won't have a single, elf in your portfolio, but then you get hired to do, 5 paintings of elves.
Here's a technical question, which is like the total opposite of what we just had. So how do you create edges with halftones? Do you still use hard lines as boundaries when shading halftones? Example, when illustrating a fatty area like a cheek.
Edges are actually independent of value to a certain degree. So yes, when you're creating a halftone shape, that halftone shape is still going to have a wide range of edges ranging from soft to hard. The difference being that when you're working with a low contrast shape, meaning you're going from one value to another value that are very close together, you might have a hard edge in there, but it doesn't read as hard because the value jump isn't as large. but you're still going from one value to another value with a very sudden jump, with no blending or softening or transition between the two. Yes, you will. Every value transition has the possibility of any number of different edges. It's just that when you're working with a high contrast area, like say down here in the jaw, going from that dark cast shadow to the light of the neck, it reads as a harder edge because you're going from a very dark value to a very light value. Whereas up here in the cheek, well, actually that's quite dark, but over here on the cheek, I might go from this little shape here to this shape down here just as suddenly, but it just doesn't read as hard an edge because the values are closer together. So again, I hope that made sense. I think it did.
Got a couple questions regarding freelancing. First is, I often hear the statistic of 5 to 10 years to break into the industry. What do you think of that, and are there exceptions, and what sets those exceptions apart?
There's always exceptions to everything. What sets them apart is that they're damn good. They're damn good, and they have a marketable style. So that's what sets them apart. But yeah, I would say that 5 years is probably not so much to break in. I mean, if you're decent, if you have a professional caliber portfolio, it'll take you about a month to break in. The thing is, you have to be honest with yourself, and is my portfolio professional caliber? And what I mean by that is not going and looking at some fourth tier card game and saying that your best piece in your portfolio is better than the worst piece in that game. Now that's not a professional portfolio. A professional portfolio means the worst piece in your portfolio is better than the average work in a mainstream game. So if you want to work for Magic, for instance, if that's what you mean by breaking in, your worst piece in your portfolio better be better than half the pieces in the set. So if you're that good, it's going to take you about a month to break in. If you're struggling and your work isn't quite there, well, then you need to keep working. So it's not really so much a matter of time, but on average, I would say that I've seen making that jump from being a student to a working professional, the time needed to make that skill level jump for your average professionally driven individual is probably 5 to 10 years, because most schools do not prepare you for doing professional work in any way, shape, or form. And that's not to say all. If you're talking about genre illustration, editorial illustration, ad illustration, that's a little bit different. But yeah, I would say that's a pretty reasonable assessment. And then the difference is those young artists who are honest with themselves and they get a good education and they have a marketable style and a marketable subject matter, and they're really, really good. And so they jump right in. So yeah, that's the big thing. But yeah, it takes time. It takes a lot of time because, again, most of what your student portfolio is gonna be mostly useless. Not useless in doing it because you're building skills, but most school projects just are not designed to help you break into genre illustration, in my experience. So you're gonna have to do a lot of that on your own. And even if you're working at a clip of doing a piece a month, which is pretty unlikely for someone coming right out of art school, and doing professional caliber pieces at one a month, that's pretty unlikely. But even if you did that, it's going to take, even that right there, that's probably going to take you 8 months to a year to even have a portfolio that is ready to be shown to get work. So right there, that's a year. And odds are, not every one of those pieces is going to come out at a professional caliber. So then all of a sudden it starts expanding out to 2 years. So yeah, it's really competitive, and it's getting better all the time. The work that's in Magic the Gathering now, as opposed to the stuff that was being done when I first started doing Magic work, man, it's night and day. Not even the same thing. It's so much better now. So that's another thing. It's if you're looking at the work that was done a year ago, and this is going to start sounding really depressing. But if you're looking at the work that's in a current set, you're talking about work that was done a year ago, and odds are, every single one of those guys, well, maybe not every, let's say 80% of those guys has continued to get better. And 20% of them aren't doing Magic work anymore because they didn't continue to get better. So yeah, odds are the work that's being done right now for Magic is probably even better than the stuff you're seeing coming out for Magic. So yeah, but all that shouldn't matter. I wouldn't even worry about that. I know it's hard not to worry about it when you're eating top ramen, but worry about getting better. If you worry about getting better, if you worry about getting good and creating work that's on par with the professional work that you see out there, then the rest will take care of itself. Especially now, because now it's not even hard to get your work seen. Again, 15 years ago, when I was starting to try and break into illustration, it was hard to get your work in front of the people who are doing the hiring. Now it's easy. Just get a Instagram account, or what is it, Workstation? Or ArtStation? Whatever.
What do the kids use now?
Yeah, what are the kids using now? Get off my lawn. All that stuff. It's just so easy to get your work in front of. There's this sort of myth that art directors are trying to keep people out of working. No, art directors love finding new, good people. That's like their favorite thing. They're not trying to keep anybody out. They're constantly trying to find new, good people. Always, every art director I've ever seen, almost all they're ever talking about is this new artist that they just found that's gonna, rock everybody's world. It's one of their favorite things to do. So yeah, they're not, man, they love finding new people. As well they should. I like seeing new people too. So, but yeah, get good, you'll get work. Odds are, if you're not getting work, you're probably just not good enough yet. And there's no shame. Everybody wasn't good enough at one time. Except me. I was always awesome.
It's true. It's true.
Okay, so now I'm going to switch over. Actually, I continue to use my my graphite pencil there, and I should be switching over to using my Wolf Carbon here. The pencil of choice for Norman Rockwell. I'm sure it's probably a completely different pencil at this point, but I like Wolf Carbons. They work really well with graphite pencils, and they don't get that same shininess that graphite pencils tend to get. But probably back to the question earlier, probably the best answer I can usually give is not so much how long it takes to break in, but from the time you start studying seriously, you're probably talking about 10 to 15 years. If you work diligently and study hard and take it seriously and make it your life's passion, you're probably talking about 10 to 15 years on average. Certainly there's people that have a clarity of vision and an unusual work ethic, and happen into the right circumstances that speeds up the process a bit. But I'd say it's usually about, say, 3 or 4 years to develop your fundamental skills, another 2 years to develop your professional skills, and then probably 3 to 4 years to develop your portfolio, and then probably another 5 years before you make enough connections that you have a steady stream of work coming in that you can actually make a living. So that's not breaking in so much, but actually making a living, being able to actually pay your bills. Because breaking in, man, that's one thing, but actually being a professional and being able to afford, life's little things, being able to actually make a car payment and pay a mortgage, and the things that you typically need to do as a grown-up. Yeah, that's a slightly different thing.
So I know the answer to this question, but we have a comment asking it. How long have you been into horror movies and illustration?
As long as I can remember. Yeah, I can't remember really. I mean, I'm sure there was a time that I was not into horror movies, but I was probably like 3. I got into horror movies younger than I should have. But there were sort of some circumstances surrounding that sort of drew me to that. But yeah, pretty much always. I mean, as long as I've known what horror movies were, it was probably pretty much my genre of choice. And pretty much since the first time I saw it, Alien has been my favorite movie, and I saw it really young. So yeah, pretty much always. And illustration, when and again, Tom said he knew the answer because he's seen most of my first portfolio, and my first real illustration portfolio had 3 horror samples and 3 comic book samples, because those were the things I was into. I always wanted to really do
comic.
Well, yeah, still totally is. Yeah, absolutely. I've always wanted to do comic work. In fact, when I first started at Watts Atelier, I thought I wanted to be like a proper comic artist, do interior panel to panel work. And I figured out very quickly that probably wasn't for me. So I thought, oh, sweet, I can do covers though, or hopefully I can do covers. If I work hard enough, I'll get good enough to do covers. And that's when I got exposed to Glenn Orbick's work, who was brilliant and did great work, and his significant other, Laurel Blackman, who continues to do great work, and Phil Hale. And when I saw what they did, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be Phil Hale and Glenn Orbick, wrapped up in one. And I'm still trying to be Phil Hale and Glenn Orbick wrapped up into one.
Would you say that you're trying to be a Frankenstein
Oh,
version?
you can say that.
Hey-o.
But yeah, more or less, yeah. And then hopefully my own take on what they did. But yeah, kind of a slightly looser, shadowy, type of look to illustration, but then do comic work. Like I'd love to do more superhero stuff. I haven't gotten to do much superhero stuff. Most of the comic work that I've done has been in the horror genre, which I am not complaining about by any stretch of the imagination. That wasn't even really an option when I first started doing illustration. That wasn't, horror comics weren't really a thing. And then Walking Dead, a little thing called Walking Dead came along and kind of changed all that. Which, by the way, if anyone knows Robert Kirkman, I'd love to do a cover for Walking Dead. Just throw that out there.
You?
Yeah, I know, right?
Crazy.
Shocking. But yeah, anyway, that was my first portfolio. I actually had a my take on Bride of Frankenstein illustration in there. A really bizarre piece called Iron Womb.
Yeah, that one's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty nutso piece, but it got a lot of attention. Got into Spectrum,
awesome.
so yeah, that was kind of cool. My wife still hates that piece. But, yeah, it's pretty disturbing. I suspect probably most women hate that piece. It's yeah, not the most family friendly of my work, that's for sure. But then and then there was a sort of a Western horror piece that I did that was a cowboy that had been lynched. So those are 3 of my first samples.
Oh, I do remember that one.
Yeah,
That's an old one.
Yeah, that one got a lot of attention too. I'm still proud of that piece. I've actually thought about revisiting it and doing a new version, so maybe I will. And then I did a Hulk illustration, a Hulk sample, a Wolverine sample, which Dan Dos Santos owns.
It's the Wolverine, the Sentinel one?
Yeah.
That one's cool.
And Iron Man. And so those were my first 6 samples that I did, and that was the portfolio that got me my first work. Along with there was a couple other pieces in there, but those were like the ones that I'd sat down and actually done for a portfolio. So I just, Jeff and his dad told me, put in your portfolio what you wanted to do, and then I quickly did a bunch of stuff that there wasn't really a market for, because what I wanted to do there really wasn't a market for, or I didn't think there was. And then and people told me I was crazy, and then very quickly there was a market for it. Not because of me, I just got lucky. In fact, one of my first portfolio reviews was with a lady named Dawn Murin, who's still an art director, actually one of the Magic art directors, and she was working on D&D at the time, and she basically told me, not a chance in hell, because I had one piece in there that was even vaguely D&D, but I just kind of showed my work to whoever would look at it. And she was very nice. She actually didn't say that. She was actually very nice about it. But then she became the art director on a game called Hecatome, which was sort of a horror version of Magic the Gathering. And she emailed me up. She had remembered me from Comic-Con from the portfolio review and asked if I wanted to work on this new horror game. It didn't last very long.
Cards for that.
Yeah, I did an absolute massive amount of cards for that. Because that was when I was taking pretty much everything that, we were talking about earlier. I was taking pretty much everything that anyone would offer me, because I was just looking for that break, and that turned out to be it.
Yeah, those are awesome. That was actually right when I started at school. I remember.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that was. I mean, talking about a project that just came along that was tailor made for me. It was awesome. And then that led to her recommending me to Jeremy Cranford at the time, who was the art director on Magic at the time, and got me Magic work. And then she moved over and started doing book covers and gave me some book cover work. And yeah, so I mean, sometimes there's a lot of hard work involved, but there's also a fair amount of right time, right place. At the time I was showing my portfolio to someone who, really wasn't in a place to hire someone with my kind of work. But then 6 months later, she was. So, try not to get caught up in that trap of, oh, I'm not going to show my work to that person because, they don't care. You never know. You never know when all of a sudden they might care.
So here's an interesting one. Is there something that you studied that wasn't necessarily visual arts related, but something beyond, such as philosophy, that helped improve your art overall? Or your mindset in your art?
visual arts related. I mean, my quickest answer to that was going to be movies and storytelling, visual storytelling within movies. But that's obviously still visual arts to a certain degree, so that probably doesn't count. Beyond that, probably sports and competitive philosophies is probably one of the biggest things. I train art and I train a lot of things very much the way that I train for athletics. And I would say that prior to becoming an aspiring professional artist, because when I grew up I didn't even think that was a thing. I grew up in a fairly rural area, and I didn't really know. I was so ignorant of such things that I thought most professional artists, with a few exceptions, I thought most professional artists were like plumbers during the day, and then made a little extra money on the side doing artwork at night. That was kind of because that was the world I lived in, and I was just a naive kid. I wasn't really I don't know. I don't know what the word would be for it, but I certainly was not worldly. So it took me some time. Going to Comic-Con the first time was when I first figured that out. But anyway, I drifted off. What was the question again?
Something that you.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
But I played sports
Yeah,
from the time I was very, very young. I mean, pretty much from the time I could walk, I was playing sports, and so they became a reference point for a great many things for me, and so yeah, I would guess probably sports and sports philosophy. Reading books by guys like John Wooden and guys of that sort. It's not just about sports. It's often about dealing with adversity and confrontation and sort of rising above your situation to do something unusual, to do something unexpected, to do something that you're told. Not that I was necessarily told. I mean, my parents were actually ridiculously supportive in most things that I ever wanted to do. But there wasn't really a roadmap for me. So in a way, even though people didn't really tell me that I couldn't do something, it was just kind of out there. It was like, I'd never seen anyone do it, so you can't do it, type of thing. So it took some time for me to do that, and since I didn't know that, but growing up I did know quite a few guys who went on to do something equally improbable, which was become professional athletes. I didn't know anyone who became a professional artist, but I knew a lot of, maybe not a lot, but I knew more than my fair share of people who went on to become professional athletes. And I saw what they did to become professional athletes. And I thought, my mind just made the natural connection that it's like, oh, well, that's what they had to do to excel in this unusual and very competitive field. So there's no reason that same type of training and mentality wouldn't translate over to art. And I think I just never really cared enough about anything else to make that leap. But I think that probably applies to just about everything. Sitting down and being willing to do mundane things in a repetitive fashion. I think it was Jeff that said that to be a professional artist, you almost have to be a little dumb, because you have to be willing to just sit down and do the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over until something clicks, because it doesn't always click the first time. And a lot of people will go, well, I tried that 10 times and nothing happened, so that doesn't work. One of the things that we say around the school is trust the process. And trust the process means look at all these really good people that have gotten good before you, and they trained the same way. And we were lucky enough to work in a methodology or a philosophy, or whatever you want to call it, that has trained a bunch of good people. So all you have to do is go, well, you want to get good? Yes, I want to get good. Well, do you think James Bama is good? Yes, I think James Bama is very good. Do you think Morgan Weisling is good? Yes, I think Morgan Weisling is very good. Do you think Clark Hewlings is good? Yes, I think Clark Hewlings is very good. Do you think Jeff Watts is good? Yes, I think Jeff Watts is very good. So you start going down this list, and yes, I think that guy's good. I think that guy's good. I think that guy is also very good. And then the bomb gets dropped on you. All of these people were trained in a version of exactly what you're being taught right now. So if they trained this way and they got really good, well, then theoretically, I should train that way, and I will also get very good. And while that's not certainly a universal truth, it's the closest thing to a truth that I was exposed to. It was certainly more a truth than, hey, let me just go stumble around in the dark and draw a lot and get good, because I knew no one who had gotten good that way. So it was kind of just the thing that seemed logical. It still seems logical. So again, I tend to wander. So just tell Tom to tell me to shut up if.
Yeah, because that's going to help, because I don't wander either.
So right now I'm working with a 2H, so it's a pretty hard pencil. And I'm really honestly using it almost more to push the charcoal around on the surface, like a shading stump or a shading tortillon, more so than even using it to really draw. I mean, I'm hardly even pushing hard enough to make a mark with a pencil this hard. But I'm almost trying to just sculpt these shapes. So I'll make these little swirling strokes, and it takes this sort of puddle of charcoal that's loosely sitting on the surface, and it sort of feathers it up and creates a really nice little soft edge that I think looks cool. So a little bit ago, I don't know if I mentioned it, but I was actually drawing with the eraser, starting to pull out some of these highlights along here. I can even come up and into this cheek. Pull out a little highlight on that cheek. And it's really nice, especially when you're drawing, you know, someone with this sort of, you know, mottled, creased, wrinkly skin. You can create a lot of detailing that would be very difficult to do with just pencil. You guys are asking some great questions though, so keep them coming.
I had a question earlier regarding your training. When did you start training seriously in the arts?
When did I start training seriously in the arts? I'm just going to tell you when I started training with Jeff at Watts Atelier, and that was when I was 21. So it would have been 96-ish, I want to say. I think 1996. So that was when I first, when I started, rigid, academic training. I thought I had already started before that, but I learned very quickly that I, in fact, had not been. It was very shallow sort of way of training that was too targeted. I mentioned that I wanted to become a comic artist, so pretty much what I was just doing is studying comic art and not really learning how to draw. So I wasn't doing any of the things that the comic artists that I liked had done. I was just going straight to studying their work, and so it was just a sort of a shallow, superficial facsimile of the people that I liked, and they were horrible. It was just awful comic book samples, and I thought I had a chance of getting work. I was very delusional.
I think it's kind of common though in the industry until you kind of get out there in the wider world,
Yeah.
When you only hear the praise of your close group of friends or your family.
Right, because they draw just like, your family doesn't know much,
Right.
and in most cases, and if you're Dave Palumbo, obviously your family knows quite a bit, so that's a little bit different. But in most cases, most people's families don't know very much, and so you get sort of caught in this loop of your mom thinking your work is great, and your friends, they're going to say your work is great because your work is about on par with theirs, and they want to believe that they have a shot. So if they admit that you don't have a shot, then they're admitting that they don't have a shot. So that's also not a very good barometer for proficiency or success.
So we've got a question concerning a couple different types of training. Basically, what we teach at the Atelier. Could you explain the difference between sight size and comparative measurement techniques?
Sight size, for the most part, is a direct measurement. So you're looking up at the model and you set up a grid system, in most cases, and you set up, and you have a measuring stick. And if the head is 1 inch tall on the model, when you measure it, from where you're seated, then it will be 1 inch tall on your drawing, and so on and so forth. So it's a direct measurement. You're measuring the model directly and converting that exactly to your pad in a very precise and measured way. With comparative measurement, just like the name implies, you'll take one thing and compare it to another, and then make sure that relationship is equalized in your drawing. So basically, if the head is, just to throw something out there, but say the head is half the length of the arm when you look at the model, well then on your drawing, the head better be half the length of the arm. So it's a bit more seat of your pants, a bit more improvisational. It maybe has a tendency to not be quite as accurate, but in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, it isn't as relevant to a real world situation, for most professional avenues. So for instance, if you want to be a comic artist, well, how are you going to use sight size to be a comic artist? Because it doesn't apply. I mean, that methodology, that thought process doesn't apply. That's not to say that you can't use much of what you learn from sight size, value control, shape design, all those sorts of things. For sure, you can use certain skills, but it doesn't apply directly. You'd have to combine that with a lot of other teaching. So the Riley method It works as a great foundation to add almost anything else to it, and you can have some great success, and that's evidenced by excuse me, a little dry throat. That's evidenced by the fact that someone who has been trained in the Riley method is successful in almost every commercial art field, almost any art field, period, that I can think of. Morgan Weisling, in my mind, and again, if you disagree with this, that's fine. But if you disagree with this, then we probably shouldn't even be having this discussion, because you have no alignment with my opinion whatsoever. So, but yeah, to me, Morgan Weisling is one of the best gallery painters out there. Jeff is one of the best gallery painters out there, both trained in the Riley method at CAI by Glenn Orbick and Fred Fixler. And then you have Rob Ruppel, who I don't know if he's still at Naughty Dog, but he concept designer who used to be one of the lead concept designers or lead creative heads at Naughty Dog. I don't know exactly what his job was, but concept artist, basically, really rockin' concept artist at Naughty Dog. And he had other training as well. I think he went to Art Center as well. So it's not like that was his only training.
Solid illustrator before that.
Yeah, and he was a really ridiculously good illustrator before that, and still probably could be at any time that he wanted to. And he was trained in the Riley method. Greg Pro is also an incredibly high-end concept designer. Works for Disney Imagineering and does a bunch of theme park work. Also trained in the Riley method. Then you've got Glenn Orbick, who was an illustrator before his untimely passing, and Laurel Bleckman, who is an illustrator. So yeah, I mean, pretty much every field that you can think of, they've moved into that. I don't know if that's true with site size. As far as just versatility and ability to adapt to almost whatever you need it to do, I would say the two philosophies that I think have been the most successful, again, in my opinion and in my experience, have been just across the board, have been the Riley method, and for lack of a better term, the Harry Carmian method, which is a lot of what or Steve Houston method. Whoever, I'm not really sure what that method's called or who originated it. But those are kind of the two most famous guys for teaching that. And then you've got Kevin Chen, who kind of teaches an amalgamation of the two because he studied both. I'm far from a contemporary illustration historian or anything, so I may be off on some of this stuff, but wonderful artists that have been trained in those two methods, just from top to bottom. Just so many good guys out there. Nathan Fowkes, another one that was trained, I know at least partially in the Riley method. And the list goes on and on and on of guys who have done, James Bama actually studied with Frank Riley and was one of his monitors in his classes for a while, basically one of his student teachers, from what I understand. And Clark Hewling's another phenomenal fine artist, gallery painter, and he studied there. And Gene Colan, a comic artist, a phenomenal comic artist, one of my favorite comic artists, and another one that I was kind of shocked to find out that he, at least at one time, was a Riley student. And I love his work. I think it's phenomenal. Who else? Just off the top of my head. Basil Gogos, I know, studied with Riley for a time. Another phenomenal, someone would consider one of the greatest horror artists of all time. Many would consider, one of the greatest, horror artists of all time. So. It crosses genre, it crosses whatever you want to call it, a job path. It's not like it teaches you to be this or teaches you to be that. It teaches you to be an artist. And you can go off and do almost anything you want with it. It's just a good solid foundation that you can then attach almost any specific techniques to. And I just haven't seen a lot of philosophies or art approaches that have that same kind of versatility to them. The Vilpu technique is also fairly versatile, but I think it tends to be a little heavier on the linear side of things. Even though he himself is also a fabulous painter, most of the people I've seen him train have gone on into animation. And again, I'm not claiming that I know everything about everything, just from the people that I've seen that are really good at that sort of Vilpu approach to drawing. It tends to lend itself a little more towards animation or maybe comic work than necessarily painted pieces. Like the finished tonal work that I've seen done in that methodology doesn't really do much for me personally. So, and again, don't take all this. I mean, don't take this as gospel. I'm just another, ignorant person out there doing my best. So, but you ask the question, I answer it. So, but those would be, probably my. If someone asked me, what should I study, or how should I study, I would say Riley method, the Carmian Steve Houston method, and the Vilpu method would be probably your best path to versatility. If you want to paint really accurately from the live model, and a lot of sight size people would freak out at this, or from photo reference, sight size is a great way to do that. And I have seen many fabulous artists that were trained in sight size. So, but you have to know what you're going after. If you want to work more imaginatively, genre illustrator, comic artist, animator, probably not going to be your best bet. And again, please don't go running around saying, Erik Gist says sight size sucks, because that isn't what I said. But just realize what the strengths of that approach are and are not. I've been through those kind of shenanigans enough in the past where someone takes what I say and, builds a cult out of it or something.
Are you saying you don't like the cult that I built out of your words, Erik?
No, and your shrine is disturbing as well.
Well.
But I do like your dog.
Yeah, well, she likes you.
And your son's alright too.
He's a good guy. He says hi, by the way.
Tell him hi back. Lego master extraordinaire.
He does like Legos.
And he's good at them.
He is.
So just slowly layering this up, building it up. Occasionally I'll come back in with my paintbrush and blend some of those edges. Again, just like I would do an oil paint, come in, take the paint that's on the surface, just kind of blend and soften. I might pick up a little bit of the charcoal down here if I feel like that's necessary. There's this weird little mark that keeps on showing up on his chin that I'm not a huge fan of that mark. I don't know what that's from. here and soften along the brow ridge a little bit. Like that's something that I just haven't really found a way to do with any other dry media. Just be able to take a soft brush and go in there and strategically soften edges. And it reminds me a lot of, again, oil paint or even gouache to a certain degree. And one thing is I have a tendency towards really hard edges, which can give my work a bit of a, for lack of a better term, a cartoony look that I'm not necessarily fond of. And so one thing I like about this is that it keeps my edges softer and gets me away from that sort of overly designy look that I think I kind of use as a crutch a little bit. So it's a shortcoming that I perceive in my own work, whether it's true or not, or whether someone else is a fan of it or not. Sometimes when I look at my work, it just doesn't feel, it doesn't have an honest look to it. I'm using almost just a decent sense of design to obscure the fact that I'm not as good with edges as maybe I could be. So by being able to go in and just soften those edges, I like that.
I like that.
Yeah. Just one of those things where you're constantly looking to improve yourself, to push yourself to that next level. Unfortunately, sometimes people like things about your older stuff for that reason. Just stylistically, they were attracted to it. That's always unfortunate, because I like people who are fans of my work, obviously, and I want to make them happy, and I want to have them continue to be fans of my work. But over time, you're constantly, again, you're just constantly looking to improve. And what you perceive as improvement isn't always going to jive with what other people perceive as improvement. Especially in a world that seems to be very attracted to individualism and style. And I'm sure he didn't come up with the saying, but a comic artist that I like a lot, Will Spertaccio, I saw a video once where he said that your style is basically is made up of all the things you do wrong, which is maybe a bit of a harsh way to do it, and I think it was said for a joke effect to a certain degree. More specifically, your style is made up of the things that you do inaccurately. Now, sometimes inaccuracy can be a conscious choice to achieve the desired effect. It's not always necessarily wrong, just your artistic license. And sometimes as you make academic corrections to your work, i.e. More accurate proportions, better edges, more accurate edges, things like that, what can get lost is a bit of that individualism. Like sometimes some people's style is they almost couldn't even pin down why their style is their style, because there is blind spots in their training, things that they don't even know that they do wrong, things that they never trained to do correctly, and it happens out into an interesting or cool look, and they ride that to acclaim, which is great. But I sort of am so swathed in academia because of what I do for a chunk of my living, teach other people how to draw, that sometimes those cool little things that maybe would have been best left alone get quashed. It can be very difficult to hang on to your individualism, not in academic training, but in being an academic teacher, because you're constantly looking for that way to master a concept, so that you can better educate people. Whereas as a student, you can go, I know that that's correct, but I don't care. You know, I know that I'm doing that wrong, but I like the look of it. As a teacher, you can't really do that, in my opinion, because then that makes your teaching shallow. It makes your teaching less than ideal. Because as a teacher, at least as a drawing teacher, not necessarily as an illustration teacher, but as a drawing teacher, my job is to teach you how to draw. And that means how to draw correctly or accurately. And because if I teach too much of my personal opinion, my personal styles, well, then that's not being very fair to my students, because I'm taking the decisions out of their hand. So what I want to do is teach them the correct way to do it, and then let them choose, as students are apt to do and as artists are apt to do, make their own choices and choose to emphasize, certain things, and develop their own opinion and their own look. But as I'm doing that sometimes, basically, to be a teacher to a certain degree, you have to kind of remove yourself from the equation, to a certain degree. And by doing that, it makes it a bit difficult to pursue your own personal vision. And that kind of goes back to the question that we were addressing earlier. Is it difficult to become a successful commercial artist and be true to yourself? And my question was, not really. There's artists that do it. Is it possible to be a teacher and hang and remain and be honest to yourself? That is harder. But still not impossible. Jeff has a tremendous personal voice, and is a great teacher. Steve Houston has a tremendous personal voice and is a great teacher. So also still possible. But in my experience, it is very difficult, and I don't know about Mr. Houston, but I know it's something that Jeff struggles with, as we all do. Because you kind of get torn a little bit between what you want to do and what is best for your students, who, if you're any good at teaching at all, you care a great deal about. It may not always seem that way, but every single one of my students I care about. Every single one. And I want them to all get to their end goal, whatever that may be. and it's probably one of the reasons that I'm still a teacher after all these years, is that in some ways it actually gives me greater satisfaction when I see one of my students succeed and get a step closer to where they want to be, whether that's getting into Spectrum, getting into a gallery, selling a painting, whatever it is, getting a job at DreamWorks, whatever it might be. I don't know, I guess not DreamWorks so much anymore, but Pixar. Then it's that gives me a great swell of pride when I see that, because I know how rare that is. I know that it is an unusual gift to be able to do something that you truly love at a level that brings you satisfaction. And I'm not even talking about necessarily being a professional. That certainly is a great feather in your cap, and is an undeniable testimonial to your skill level. But I've also taught a great many people that had almost no interest in doing this for a living, and got phenomenally good, ridiculously good, and never really made a dime at it. Didn't care to make a dime at it. Wasn't their goal. And to me, that's almost, in a way, that's almost more noble. That you're not doing it because you have to pay the bills. You're doing it just purely because you love doing it. And I know Tom's seen this too. I mean, we've had a lot of people, man. They're just hobbyists, and it's one of the things I like most about our school. There's no admissions requirement. There's no anything. Literally anybody can sign up and take a class with, Jeff or me or Tom or Lucas or Ben or my wife. Whoever, whatever. It doesn't. There's no admissions requirements at our school, and it's one of the things I like the most, because you'll get, everything from a Sunday painter mother of 3 to someone who works at Blizzard, and everything in between. And it doesn't matter if they come in and they work hard. I come in and I teach hard, and they get good. And it's awesome. It's something, again, that I take an immense amount of pride in. It's not anything. It's not something that I would trade for anything in the world. So that's building up nicely. It's got a good overall feel, I think. Aside from pencils of various different hardnesses, I also have erasers of various different sizes and shapes. We've got, this little clicky eraser, and this little clicky eraser, and that little clicky eraser, and my kneaded eraser. So I'll have a tendency to do almost as much drawing with my eraser as I do anything else. And I just like saying clicky eraser.
Yeah, I noticed that. Caught that. Scuba.
But keep those questions coming. You can nearly ask me anything, and I'll do my best to answer it. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to this drawing or.
Oh, things are gonna get weird now.
Yeah, right. But anyone who knows my wife or I knows that we're probably pretty unreasonably honest and open about things. So it's.
Your wife more than you.
Yeah, definitely met him more than I. Yeah.
So we got kind of a fun question here for you. What do you think makes a good monster design or a good monster image? I guess that's almost like two different questions there.
Yeah.
So let's go with both.
So let's start with monster design. To me, you can break most monster designs down into basically two categories: humanish and not humanish. Humanish, the more you can bring out and make that creature relatable, like Frankenstein, for instance, the more horrifying it can be because it's sort of a shadowy reflection of who we are, and it shows us what we can be. So the more you can put, the closer you can make it to being something that someone understands, it will horrify them that they understand it. So, for instance, in this case, even though it's not very accurate to the book, the soulfulness in Karloff's eyes were integral to this character's success. So to me, in this case, even though Pierce's design is phenomenal, it's great, what really makes it sing is the guy under the makeup, and that's Karloff. Anyone else who wore the makeup, while there were some fine actors and they did a good job, it was never the same. And it's not just because he did it first. He just brought a relatability to the character that made it special. And so again, that horrifies people when they can actually relate to something that they wish they could not relate to. So horrifying. Hannibal Lecter, along those same lines, even though that's not really a design, but as far as the character goes, it's horrifying. Because it's so close to who we are. The other side would be not human. And in a lot of ways, the more abstract you can make it, almost the more not ununderstandable that you can make it, the more mysterious you can make it, i.e. Alien. It's horrible because it is unknown, and you don't know what to expect. You don't know what it's going to do. It has no motivation. One of the great anomalies is the combination of the two, which is Michael Myers, an incredibly underappreciated both design, even though it's basically just a William Shatner mask painted white, which is just horrifying in and of itself. But it's the fact that it almost has both. It's got something we can understand, which is a human-ish face and mask, but it's so blank and completely without motivation. it's a force of nature. It kind of has the best of both worlds. It has what makes the not human horrifying, and it also has what makes the human horrifying as well. So that would be my answer, is sort of two ends of the spectrum.
So going off of that, then would you say things like Cronenberg style monsters almost come full circle with that, where it's so bizarre and foreign, but it's a twist on human anatomy and what kind of lurks underneath?
Yeah, again, a lot of his stuff is also that sort of that horror of what you can become, mixed with what you end up becoming being so unrelatable. You actually often see the transformation with him, something that starts out relatable and becomes unrelatable. And if you can show that, that's also completely horrifying. Because he's basically again, he's got both in one package. So yeah.
So that's what makes a good monster design, in your opinion. What makes a good monster image? So from like a illustration standpoint, what makes a good horror image then, with those principles of creature design in mind?
That's such a difficult one, because what makes something horrifying is either something that's relatable. So that's a little easier one, right? I mean, to make something somewhat relatable, vampires, zombies, which is why that makes up a huge percentage of horror illustrations, a massive amount of it. It's very difficult to deal in, and I can never say this word right, obfuscation, to obscure things, make them unknown through a lack of recognition, is very difficult to do in illustration, because your job as an illustrator is to show people things. So that is a very difficult one. But when it's done successfully by people like Caniglia, it's insanely effective. But it's so hard to do, because again, your job as an illustrator is to show people things. So if you can find a creative way to tell the story and at the same time show the viewer as little as possible and let their imagination run wild, that's one of the best paths to take if you can pull it off. I tend to be a little bit more straightforward, and I deal with a lot of mood. But actually, I have a whole lecture that I do on horror storytelling that relates to things like it generally speaking has more to do with the relatability side of things. Like, how can you take something horrific and make it relatable to people? And that's usually by applying things like step down imagery, which is taking a mundane situation and twisting it into something horrific. Is generally pretty effective. By just finding some way to take sort of conventions and turning them on their head, can be very frightening to people, because they'll look at it and they'll go like, that is familiar, and you've turned it into something horrible for me. That's one of the best things you can do. It's not exactly a kind thing to do, by it would be like, taking, something that looks like vanilla ice cream and smells like vanilla ice cream and has the consistency of vanilla ice cream, but tastes like rotting flesh. That is horrifying. If you can do that with illustration, you've got a horrifying illustration on your hands, because it's something that people almost expect one thing, but then as they look closer, they get something altogether different. And even the king of Americana, Norman Rockwell, played with that similar concept in his April Fool's illustrations that he would do, where he would basically do a Norman Rockwell illustration, but then when you would look closer, things would be off. Things would be different. They weren't usually horrifying. They were just things that were just sideways. And he knew what he did so well that he was the best person to turn it sideways. And by doing that, there at least to me, there's an uncomfortable aspect to those April Fools. They're not just April Fools where it's like, oh, this is a sideways world. They're actually kind of creepy and horrifying to me. Like there's one where it's a doll shop or a curio shop, and a little girl's picking out a doll from the old doll maker, and like the dolls all have his head or something. I can't remember it exactly, but it's something like that. And it's like an episode of Twilight Zone. It's just really, really creepy. Even though I'm not entirely sure he meant it that way, he just meant to kind of play with a genre that he had almost more or less created or at least popularized. But because he did that, it was creepy because you expected this, feel-goodery. You expected this sugary image filled with happiness, and instead you got something that was not happy at all. So often playing with conventions, finding some way to take something that should be one thing and making it something else is, to me, one of the best ways to create a horror illustration, because you're able to play with expectation, I guess, would be the best way of putting it. You're able to take what people are used to seeing and making it something different, rather than what passes for horror illustration often, which is, just someone with lots of tattoos. It's like, ooh, horrifying. So that to me is often what I think can make a horrifying image, is playing with expectations. How about that? If I have to simplify it down into one simple sentence, twisting expectations. But like I said, I have a whole 1 hour lecture that I actually give on that subject.
I heard you go for more than 1 hour on that subject.
Yeah, well, yeah, but the lecture,
The actual lecture.
is an hour.
It's like a 1 hour lecture?
But yeah, I can go on and on and on. And I'm actually trying not to do that because it will spiral quickly. I wouldn't say I'm the most talkative person in the world, but if you get me on a subject that I enjoy, I will quickly become the most talkative person in the world.
That's true. That's true. It's the worst when you get one that like both of us enjoy.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I might be teaching across from next term, so our students can look forward to that.
You and I are not the most fun for other people to be around, but we enjoy the hell out of it.
It's true.
How much time do we have left, by the way? What time is it?
We've got just under an hour.
Oh, wow. Alrighty then.
Erik Schneider asks, are you a fan of old European horror films?
The ones I have seen, yes. I wouldn't say I'm quite as knowledgeable about them as I am Hammer films, American horror films. Hammer films being one of the exceptions, and some Italian films like giallo horror and stuff like that. But there are many that I would still like to see that I have not seen. But yes, of what I have seen, I generally would say I am a fan of. I just haven't been around them since I was, 6 years old, like I have a lot of the American horror films. But yeah, I do. I like them. I think Mario Bava is actually one of the most versatile and brilliant genre directors of all time. So. He's European.
So we have a couple questions regarding Bridgman's books. Do you have any suggestions on how to study from them, how to approach them?
Yeah. In fact, if I will explain it, so don't take this as a lack of explanation, because I will move on to an explanation. But actually, if you go on my blog, deadoftheday.blogspot.com, which I don't post on anymore, but there is a post on there addressing that exact thing. And now I'll give you a brief sort of overview of what that is. The way I teach it is I study the book, or we study the book in class, and then we take his drawings and do tonal recreations of them. So we basically turn them into tonal drawings. And the reason to do this is that his drawings are a bit cryptic in their linear fashion. So by turning them tonal, it actually shows that you kind of understand what he's doing by being able to take his drawings and translate them to a tonal version. It shows that you understand it. And then the next step would be to go and find or shoot photo reference of a muscular model in those same poses. And then take that anatomy knowledge and use it to design those photos, and also observe what those muscles and shapes look like in real life, because he designs them very heavily. And then the last thing would be to go and find an artist who does Bridgman-like anatomy, someone who has clearly studied Bridgman a fair amount, like say Frank Frazetta, and then look at the way that he has taken that and do studies of try to find Frazetta poses that are similar to the Bridgman poses, and do master studies of those, and then go back through it again. And each time you go back through that, you're going to understand it a little bit better. So that is how I study Bridgman. Is that I try to translate it into a tonal representation as much as possible, because his drawings are crazy sauce, but they're full of great information. It's just you have to almost know anatomy before you can study his anatomy. So again, I hope that makes sense. But again, on my blog, there's actually examples of what I'm talking about.
I have a question concerning the use of the powder that you have. Why use the powder instead of trying to feather out with the graphite and use a softer touch with the graphite pencil?
You could do that as well. It's just a slightly different look, slightly different feel. Again, I like the spontaneity of it, rather than trying to emulate that spontaneity with the charcoal. I actually like letting things kind of happen. That might not be for everybody, but I like it. I like the randomness. I like to leave room for happy accidents to happen. I'm not a terribly large fan of always being in control, which is maybe contrary to what a lot of people are comfortable with. But yeah, I don't like it. I in things that I do in my life, and maybe this is why. So we're gonna get a little philosophical on you here. In my life, I like things to be very in control. I don't like surprises. So I think in a lot of other things that I do, I do like surprises. And I think part of that is so that then life never gets too surprising, or it acclimates you to it. So I guess in something that is relatively unimportant, and again, this is going to be horrifying for people to hear, but in things that are relatively unimportant, like art.
Gasp.
I know, right? I like surprises because it teaches me to adapt and not be bothered by little things. I also run obstacle course races a lot, and same thing. You know, you don't know what's going to be around the next corner, and by sort of acclimating myself to that in things that do not matter, like a race or like a painting or a drawing, then it sort of makes life less surprising in a way. And then at the same time, I try very hard to make my life not surprising at all. I'm pretty boring. And those two things combined keep my stress levels fairly low. I don't like stress, not a fan of stress. I would not approach a job in the same fashion, because that's different. Then that does matter a little bit more. And what I mean, just to clarify, what I mean by not important is, again, because I know I'm going to piss someone off by saying some of this stuff, is that if a drawing goes badly, you know, no one gets hurt. You know, no one dies. No one loses a limb. You know, no one gets divorced. You know, none of those things happen. So, not important in the big overall scheme of things. And it's important to keep those things in perspective. Sometimes in the moment of a piece of artwork, it can be difficult to keep things in perspective like that. And I also think that creativity thrives in uncontrolled situations. Well, what's the saying? Necessity is the mother of invention, something along those lines. And invention is essentially creativity. You know, you don't come up with an idea until you absolutely need to. You know, if you don't need to come up with an idea, then you'll tend to stumble back on the tried and true, you know, the things that have worked before. But when you start to realize that what has worked before isn't going to work, well, then you need to come up with something new. And so by using the charcoal powder, it sort of forces me to sometimes come up with something new to deal with something maybe not going the way that I want it to. And it's a situation that I've become somewhat comfortable with from demoing, because things always go horribly wrong in demos. Not today, of course.
This is just awesome and smooth.
Yeah, it's smooth.
Like Bristol.
That's right. But doing a 25-minute figure drawing demonstration, things frequently go wrong, and it doesn't really play well to students if you panic and throw a hissy fit the way you might do at home on your own when things go wrong. Much to my shame, cuss words are not a stranger to my home studio. But I think they're unusual in one of my demos.
They're unusual in your demos.
Yeah.
You're good. You're good.
Yeah, I don't think that I get too vulgar
No.
during my demos. So, and a lot of that comes from, again, becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable. And the best way to do that is by doing it when things are not on the line. Like this. I mean, it would be a shame if this went badly, but in the end, it wouldn't really matter that much. It would probably damage my reputation in 15 people's eyes or something, but
Those 15 people.
yeah, those
It'll never be the same with them.
That's right.
So Abigail has a quick question.
Okay.
We've touched on this briefly before, already in this live stream, but maybe you could expand on it. Do you have any advice for developing a book cover portfolio specifically? Maybe give some insight into, what to toss in there to show, book covers versus things like card art or gaming art.
I'll give you the advice that, as best I can remember it, what Irene Gallo told me once, and I don't think it was just me. I can't remember. Maybe we were talking directly with each other. But anyway, she was the one who said it, and she basically said that two things: if you can draw multiple figures and have them exist in a scene together and look right, then you're gonna always have work. If you can take multiple figures and put them into a scene with things that do not exist, dragons and such, and make them all exist in a scene seamlessly, you will always have work. It's not necessarily about being original or creative. It's about doing the things that they need you to do. If you can be original and creative on top of that, then great. But it's more about being able to do what people expect. It's like the opposite of horror, right? Giving people what they expect to see, what makes them comfortable, and doing it in a technically sound way. That's going to make you very unique. Nearly any professional illustrator can do, single hero center frame, kind of hero pinup art. Well, you're never going to break in doing that kind of stuff, or rarely you're going to break in doing that stuff, because there's already so many people that do it so well, and I got news for you, you're not going to do it better than Dan Dos Santos. So, that job's already taken. But there aren't that many people that can do, an army. There aren't that many people that can paint Fellowship of the Ring. It's just being able to put multiple figures on a cover together and have them be seamless, standing on the same ground plane, in the same lighting, everything agreeing, right? Making it look like it was a scene from a movie that someone shot a still of. If you can do that, then you'll get book cover work, and you'll always have book cover work, because that's what's going to set you apart. Not many people can do that well, because there isn't a lot of call for it outside of doing book covers. card art, for instance. Rarely are you going to have a card illustration that has more than one figure on it. It just doesn't happen that often. And if they do, it's usually, the main character and then, background characters. They don't necessarily need to look like they, are agreeing all that much. So that would be my advice. Being able to take disparate elements, invented elements, manufactured elements, photo referenced elements, multiple figures, and put them all in a scene together and have it look seamless. So that would be my advice. Not that I've done, immense amounts of book cover work, so do take that into account when I'm giving you advice. I've done my fair share, but I wouldn't ever call myself a book cover artist, because that would be offensive to Donato Giancola and Dan Dos Santos and guys who just crush that genre, or that field, whatever you want to call it. So, comic artist maybe, comic cover artist maybe, but not book cover. But I do know that was one of the things that got me book cover work, was my ability to put multiple figures and invented stuff and put them all in a scene together and have it look right. But just like also with anything, if you want to know what should be in your book cover portfolio, go and look at the bookshelves. What's on the bookshelves? That's what should be in your book cover portfolio. Hopefully put your spin on it. But honestly, the industry really isn't that much about being original, unfortunately. They have a formula for what sells, and that's what they care about more than anything, is selling the book. It's not necessarily about doing a great book cover. It's about selling the book. In most instances in illustration, you're a gun for hire. There are a few instances where they hire you to be you, and the more of a reputation you have, so the more of, Brahm that you are, the more often you're going to get hired to be Brahm. But in most instances, even when you're not Brahm, you're going to get hired to be Brahm because you're Brahm-like. But even more often, you're going to get hired to fill a slot, and they already have an idea for roughly how they're marketing the book, and they need you to do an illustration that fits into that marketing scheme. Because there's people out there that are much better at selling product than you and I are. I mean, just like how we were trained to be, hopefully, we were all trained to be artists and illustrators and storytellers. They were trained to sell things. And as good as you are at drawing and painting and telling a story, they are equally good at selling product. That's what they know. So what you hope to do is find a middle ground. You hope that it's a collaboration, and that they're open to your expertise on drawing and painting and telling a story, and you need to be equally respectful of their knowledge of selling things. They have a lot of market research under their belt. And again, they're not really necessarily concerned with creating a great piece of artwork. Which is always a little bit shocking for young artists to hear. You know, they think that when someone puts a cover on a book, what they want is a great book cover. Not necessarily, or at least the definition, there's a bit of a separation in what they consider a great book cover and what we as artists would consider a great book cover. You know, there are certainly those rare birds, those Frank Frazettas, that are able to create a great piece of artwork, and simultaneously that great piece of artwork sells the hell out of a book. So, you know, they can go hand in hand. But I think if you ask most publishers if they had to choose one, they would choose sell the hell out of the book. It's kind of like Hollywood. You know, Hollywood makes movies, and they have ad campaigns for those movies that aren't about creating a great movie or telling people what a great movie they made. It's about putting butts in the seats, first and foremost. Now, again, if you can do both, awesome. You're golden. You're going to be one of those rare creatures that is both commercially acceptable and artistically admired. And that's what you kind of, as an illustrator, that's what you want to shoot for, right? That's the promised land. But it's very difficult to get there, obviously, because so few people have pulled it off. You tend to kind of see one or the other. People who are very artistically unique and create beautiful artwork, or people who sell a lot of product.
So we have a question here concerning talent. Could you speak to your ideas on talent versus training? Could you speak to an idea on talent versus training?
Yes. I just have to be, again, I have to be very careful about the words I choose. Talent. Talent in my mind is nothing more than aptitude. So it's not this magical thing that allows people to do things regardless of hard work or education. Talent is aptitude, and that aptitude can be genetic. Perhaps you have more cones in your eye and you can see a wider range of color, or it can be environmental. Perhaps your father or mother was an interior decorator, and so you always had well harmonized colors about the house because they knew what they were doing and they were educated there, and so you never knew non-harmonized colors, and so of course you harmonize colors naturally. So aptitude can be genetic, it can be environmental. That is what I would refer to as talent. But aptitude undeveloped is just another thing. It doesn't really matter. You know, it's like you could be the fastest kid, genetically speaking, the fastest kid in your high school, and maybe when you're a freshman that's going to impress people. But if you don't then work hard and develop that talent, someone is going to work harder than you, and when you're a senior, all you're going to be is unfulfilled aptitude, unfulfilled expectation. or in other words, a disappointment. So that is my opinion on talent. I don't agree with the easy out of saying that it does not exist, that talent isn't a thing. We've all been around long enough to know that talent is a thing. It does exist. There are genetic aptitudes and environmental aptitudes that make it easier for you to pick up certain artistic concepts more quickly. But in the end, after 20 years of hard work and sweat equity, it's not going to matter, because that's going to end up being 10% of the equation, if that. But what can happen is that the young person with an aptitude excels initially. And what happens when you excel at something? You get more attention, you get specialized training, you get accolades, all of things that encourage someone to continue to pursue a goal. Anyone who's read Malcolm Gladwell's writings, basically everything that he talks about, and if you haven't, you should probably read it. But in the end, it doesn't really matter. You go and you work hard. Don't allow someone to tell you that you can't do something. Don't rely on someone else to hand you something on a silver platter, and that natural talent is not going to matter. If you're going to sit there and let someone tell you that you can't do it, if you're going to require special attention to make you follow your dream, you know what? You weren't going to make it anyway. People who say, it's like, oh, I wanted to be an artist when I was younger, but my high school art teacher told me that I didn't have any talent. If that's all it took for you to quit, that art teacher did you a favor, because they kept you from a life of constant personal anguish at a lack of belief in yourself. So something that's more important is work ethic and belief in yourself. Way more important than natural talent. Because if all it takes is for someone to kind of poo on your dream a little bit for you to quit, you weren't going to make it. It's too hard. It's too hard, and if that's the only thing it took, that teacher was right. You weren't going to make it. Maybe not for the reasons that they said. But that's just it's a quitter's attitude, and quitters don't make professional artists. Quitters don't make professional musicians. Quitters don't make professional athletes. Quitters don't make good anything. I don't care what it is. I'm a plumber, whatever, electrician, hardware store owner. Doesn't matter. If you're a quitter, if all it takes is for someone to say, "Oh, that's a bad idea," or "Oh, you're ugly," whatever, you were gonna quit. You were just looking for an excuse. So believe in yourself and work hard, and maybe you still won't make it, but at least you'll know that you gave it your all. At least you'll know that you went all in on it and you did your very best, and the cards didn't fall in your direction. But I tell you what, if you quit, I'll guarantee you won't make it. And if you let someone else make you quit, first off, that's not a thing. No one can make you quit. I mean, short of, breaking your hands or something. But with words, no one can make you quit. You chose to quit. So that's my opinion on talent. And again, I'm probably going to get in trouble, but whatever. Talent exists. Don't believe anyone who says it doesn't exist, but it's not. It's a very small part of the equation. Yeah, we just lost 50 viewers.
It was more like 75. Yeah, you're actually getting a lot of people agreeing with you on that.
But and to expand on that a little bit, don't be bothered by failure. Don't ever be bothered by failure. Failure is just another step towards success. It really is. I know that sounds like a motivational poster, you know.
Totally true.
You know, little kitty hanging off the side of the bed, hang in there, you know. But no, it's no one succeeds all the time, and in fact, most people who are successful have failed more times than you can possibly imagine.
That's what I always stress in my classes too to my students. The road to success is paved with failure.
Yeah.
There's no other way to it.
Failure's how you learn. It's honestly how you learn things. But for some reason, in especially in this country, and in modern society in general, we demonize it. It's considered this horrible thing to fail. And in fact, it's become such a problem that we've tried to remove it from society. And I think that we're doing a lot of young people a disservice by not allowing them to fail and learning to fail properly, learning to use failure as a learning device, as a way to figure out what they did wrong and go and target that weakness. If you fail, failure's awesome. It feels awful, but failure's awesome because you now know what you don't know how to do. And one of the best ways to get better, first, you have to figure out what you don't know how to do. You have to figure out what you're not good at. And that's not always easy to figure out. But if you fail, there's no way around it. Be honest with yourself and say, oh, I failed. I don't know how to do that thing. Because that's why you fail at something. One of the biggest reasons. And then if you fail, then what you do, you get up and you go and study and work at that thing. You know, you're not good at color? Okay, well, guess what? Go and study color. Go and study, go and paint from life. One of the best ways to learn color, paint from life. Not that you're always going to paint realistic color, but the more you paint from life, the more you realize how it works, and the more you learn how something works, the more you're able to manipulate it to your desired effect.
And that understanding phase too is such a tricky one to be at
Yeah.
in relationship to failure, because there's that phase where you're able to see what's wrong, but you're not able to fix it. It's like that weird awkward teenager phase when you're training.
Yeah.
You know? And I was just talking to a student about that today, but it's that awful feeling of being able to see all of your mistakes, to see them clearly, but not understand how to fix them. That comes right before like that rampant growth happens.
Yep.
Once you get to that fixing phase, seeing and fixing at the same time, you just skyrocket in your skills.
The scary part is when you don't see it.
Yeah.
When you
Absolutely.
don't know what you're doing wrong, when you don't get it. That's the scary part. When someone points out in your work, when someone that you admire, someone that you think knows what they're talking about, points out something that you're doing wrong, and you have that feeling of, I don't see it, that's horrifying.
Yep.
But even that, it's a matter of time. It's a matter of time. Eventually you'll see it. But that's a very scary feeling. But if someone can walk over and say, your head's a little big, on your drawing, then and then you go, oh God, they're right. I didn't even notice that, but now I see it. That's a good feeling, because now you can fix it. Now you can make it right. And that's a good place to be. Don't worry that you drew the head the wrong size. Revel in the fact that now you know. And knowing is half the battle.
It sure is, Duke. And just to clarify too, that's more of a that's different from, say, getting advice on kind of personal flavor for pieces.
Right, yeah,
personal
absolutely.
preference, objective versus subjective.
But that's when things get difficult as well.
Oh yeah, because that's when you start second guessing yourself, and
Yeah.
it's super weird.
And you also don't want to lean on that excuse of, oh, well, that's my style.
Right.
Although sometimes that is a totally valid response.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to be careful that that's actually true and that you're not using that as an excuse to not get better.
It's like get out of jail free cards a lot of times.
Right.
It's not a valid one.
It goes back to what I was saying earlier, that that as a teacher you're constantly working on that technical aspect of things, and you're constantly eliminating weaknesses. Well, sometimes those weaknesses are what made your work unique. So yeah, it's always a bit of a fine line to walk. My choice is generally to purposely and fastidiously eliminate technical weaknesses so that I know how to do things right, and anyone who asks me to do something, I can sit down and do it. And I want to constantly remain true to myself, or true about my work, I should say. But then when I sit down to do my honest work, my personal work, I will choose to disregard that on an instance by instance basis. Anyone who's in my classes knows that I use a lot of analogies, a ridiculous number of analogies.
Ice cream / rotting flesh.
Yeah. We've already got a lot of that to that tonight. But one that I use is TV actors. Often when a series first starts, it's a bit awkward. I'll use Married with Children or Star Trek: The Next Generation as an example quite often because I'm old. But when those shows first start, you watch the first season of each of those shows, and they're kind of difficult to watch. They're a little awkward because they haven't quite figured it out yet. They're skilled actors doing a job, but they haven't quite figured out the characters yet. There's a learning curve there. But then eventually they figure the character out, and they start doing transcendent work that make both those shows special for what they are. But then, and that's what usually makes season 2 or 3, the best seasons of a TV show. But then enough time goes by that they start relying on catchphrases and idiosyncrasies of the character to get the easy laugh or the easy emotional response. Like in Seinfeld, George doing his snort laugh, or Elaine doing her shove, things like that go for they just get the easy laugh. It's the easy response. Kramer flying through the front door at 100 miles an hour and sliding across the floor.
Giddy up.
Yeah, giddy up. Yeah, all that stuff, right? And then after a while, they forget about the creativity that came up with those things in the first place, and they just rely on the tried and true method because they go and shoot an episode, every week. And so you fall back on routine and rhythm and habit rather than continuing to push yourself as a performer. And again, this isn't a criticism of them at all. I mean, they're doing an incredibly hard job and going in every week to do it, and after a while it's difficult to come up with new stuff. But as an artist, you can fall down on the same sort of thing. That's like, oh, I've had success with this stylistic trick to to elicit a certain response, and it worked, and then you start doing it over and over again. Like, I have a thing in my work where when I'm under a deadline, I always submit sketches where it's something emerging out of the shadows with lots of lost edges, and people like it, and I've had good responses every time I've used it. And when I'm under a tight deadline and I don't have time to necessarily dig deep, then I know that's a tried and true thing that people enjoy about my work, and I assume if the person hired me, they enjoy my work, and I submit the sketch with a couple other sketches, and it's amazing how often they pick that sketch. And then I do my little trick, and it gets the job done, and they're happy, and I get paid, and it's something that I still enjoy doing. But I'm not exactly pushing myself. I'm not trying to run a 5-minute mile or anything. I'm just doing what I've done before and had good results with. And sometimes that's a job, and sometimes that's why they hire you, because of what you've done in the past. But it's not the most rewarding thing in the world. And it's not going to, impress anyone who knows anything, because you're just doing your thing. You're doing what you do. So then as an artist, you kind of always are trying to walk that line, giving people what they've come to expect from you, but at the same time trying to find a new twist on it. And you have to be very careful not to become, 5th season Married with Children, where you're just kind of going through the paces and delivering the catchphrase or wearing a certain kind of clothing or what have you that people have come to expect. You know, what you want to do is try and find that new wrinkle, that new twist, that new version of who you are, because at the same time you don't want to just abandon who you are, because that's your professional identity and that's where your creative interests lie and things like that. So, you know, you're always just trying to find that new way of doing the same thing, or the same way of doing a new thing. You know, one or the other. Trying to find that right mixture. Again, in my opinion, but quite often the market wants what the market wants, and then you try to do something different, and people don't like that. So. And I can't even remember where that whole conversation started, but
It's okay.
yeah.
I still like it.
Yeah, the special moments are when you get both. You know, where you do something that you feel like is true to yourself, and at the same time, it's something that isn't what people have seen before. A great example of that is my buddy and an artist that I admire immensely, Jeremy Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
I've followed his career since he was just a wee lad, and he always kind of had a unique look to his work, but he never just rode that. You know, he never just said, "Oh, I've got this thing I do, and I'm going to fill my portfolio up with that thing that I do." He kept pushing and kept looking for something different, and now his work is incredibly original. And I'm just waiting for the industry to catch on to how wonderful and unique his work is. And he's going to be a star. He's going to be one of those artists that everyone goes, I wish I had come up with that. Because his work is phenomenal, and it's already starting to catch on. Like, he crushed at the LA Society of Illustrators competition last year. I think he won like 5 awards or something ridiculous. And I'm just a huge admirer of his work. I think everything he does is awesome. And but again, he doesn't just follow the formula. He has a thing that he does, and he does it really well. But I know that he painstakingly second guesses everything that he does, and never just goes, "Oh, well, this is my look, and I'm going to do that look, and people who like my look are going to love this." And, you know, it's always, I've seen him go through his creative process, and it has a lot of interesting design and lost edge elements to it, where he'll just leave things a flat white, and in a designerly way, and it looks great. But I know when he goes through the designerly process, he's like, "Oh, I'm going to silhouette this, but then I'm going to render this," and then he'll do another comp where it's the other way around, and he's not just doing the formula. It's like he has a look, he has a style, he has something that he does, but he's always looking for the best way to do it for that image, the most unique way of presenting the visuals in a way that he's happy with, and in a way that tells the story. So yeah, I've just got a huge art crush on his stuff. I think it's awesome, and it's been a privilege to see him develop as an artist and slowly find himself. And it's gonna be phenomenal when he finally gets that right project that jives with what he's doing, because when he does, it's gonna be huge.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be like, you know, James Jean getting Fables. It's going to be along those lines, where someone's going to pair him up with the right project, and it's going to blow people away. At least I hope so. I think it would be a real shame if that didn't happen, because there's something special there. another guy like that, and he kind of had to leave commercial work to a certain degree to pull it off. Is Jim Pavlik. His stuff. He's been a professional illustrator for what, 20 years?
Oh yeah,
Long
Not
time,
longer.
long time, and just in the last probably 3 years or so, he's left a lot of commercial work behind and started to explore what he really wasn't allowed to do as a commercial illustrator, because there just wasn't a market for it, with a few exceptions. And now he's crushing it. He kind of had an avenue for that in commercial work, which was doing the covers for Erie, and it just never got. Well, it did within the industry. It did get the respect it was due, but it just didn't. His covers weren't enough to carry the book to the success that his work warrants, because it's great. It's another one of those things where eventually he's gonna get paired up with the right thing, and it's gonna take off. Or more likely with Jim, it'll be his own project
I was gonna
that
say
he
even his
puts
own
together.
project that Ars Goetia stuff that he's doing is awesome.
Yeah, so that was a guy who got tired of waiting around for the right project,
Yeah.
and decided to make his own, and it's gonna be awesome. It is awesome, but it's gonna be something special. Gonna be something special.
Yeah, both those guys, the filters that they kind of, the way their mind works and the images that go through that is really
Yeah,
unique stuff.
yeah. It's not like anything else you see out there, which is isn't necessarily good for commercial work, because people might even look at it and go, "Oh, well, that's cool. I don't know what I'm gonna do with it," because like with anything new, part of market research is going, "Oh, this is a thing we know, and we pair it with this other thing we know, and it's chocolate and peanut butter." But when all of a sudden you introduce something new to the mix, they don't really know what to do with it, because it's something that didn't exist before. And so there's no market research to really back that up. So eventually what it takes is either you create your own project like Jim's doing, or some clever art director or editor pairs you up, takes a chance and pairs you up on a project, and it takes off, and all of a sudden everyone always knew. All the people that wouldn't give you a job because they didn't know what to do with your work become hipsters. But it's understandable. Like I said, if I were an art director, I wouldn't want to take a chance on an unknown, because it can mean your job. You take enough chances on unknowns and it doesn't pan out, that your job. It's your job to pair the right people with the right project. And when you don't know what the right project is for something new, I'm sure there's a lot of people that would love to work with both those guys. They just the project isn't there. It doesn't exist. But the nice thing is, we live in an era of, Kickstarter and Patreon and, things of that sort, and just the internet in general, that allows us to get exposure for our personal projects. Again, old man mode. When I was a youngin', that wasn't a thing. It wasn't. There was only one way to get your work out there, and that was to do either underground printing or find a publisher. That was it. That's all there was. But now all you need is a website.
So we've got about 5 minutes or so, a little bit more left in the stream. We've got some questions about the finishing touches you're putting on this.
Okay.
What kind of pencil are you using as you kind of go into these final layers of detail?
This is actually back to a 2H, and again, I'm mainly using it to kind of smudge around what's already there. I don't know how much actual graphite this 2H is putting on the surface. I mean, if I push harder like I am here, obviously that's putting something down on the surface. But in most instances, it's either blending out or cleaning up the edges that are already there. So, and then I'm just using the brush to kind of soften some of those edges out. So a lot of it's just subtle halftone and edge manipulation. And then picking back out some little highlights. And I'm trying to keep the focus right up here around this eye. So one of the last things I might do here is bring a, let's see, what's the softest pencil I have here? I've got a 3B. Come in and just add one more level of darkness. Into that eye. And that's probably not even going to pick up on the camera. I'm just popping one more level of value into that eye, but trying to keep those edges still nice and soft within that shadow. I don't want it to look like it's in focus. I just want it to have a slightly higher contrast. And I've got that nice highlight within the eye still. And I can come back in with this eraser. Create some of those creases and wrinkles in there. And that'll help to push that focus back up into that eye for just those last little bits of detail. And we'll just finish off by thanking you guys for watching, apologizing to anyone who I offended, and the opinions of Erik Gist are not necessarily those of Jeff Watts and the Watts Atelier. So, thanks for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed the drawing.